I read over 50 spiritual books in 3 years, trying to intellectualize my way to enlightenment, but my body was still aching and my mind was still anxious. It was only when I stopped reading and I started sweating through the practice of Ashtanga Yoga that the philosophy finally came alive. I've read the Yoga Sutras, I can quote the Gita, I even have a degree in Western philosophy, but I was still miserable. I'm Sushmita, but you can call me Sushi, and today I'm going to share the single biggest mistake that I made on my spiritual path because I was living entirely from my neck up and I was trying to find a way to think my way to peace. And if you've ever felt like there's a giant gap between what you know intellectually and how you feel physically, there's a link in the description below which will help you bridge that gap. But today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover how the physical practice unlocks something that the books don't quite teach. So let's dive right in. So if you've underlined half the spiritual books in this airport bookshop and you can talk for hours on non-duality, you've probably collected enough knowledge for an entire lifetime. This culture of accumulation has convinced us that if we can just understand enough, then we can feel smart and then we feel like we're getting somewhere. But when a real life challenge hits, whenever you lose a job or you lose a loved one or something happens and you just feel uncertain, you're just like, where did all that knowledge go? It completely just vanished in 1 second. It's this deep, frustrating disconnect between what you know and how you actually feel. If you've been like an expert on the menu for all this time, but you've never quite tasted a meal, then you know what I'm talking about. Because I've been there, and even though I was reading all of this stuff, I found myself anxious and reactive and just kind of unhappy. And all that information is useless if your nervous system is shot. And it wasn't until I stopped reading and I started sweating that I finally got what all these books were trying to say. Turns out you can't really philosophize your way out of a backbend, and you can't debate the finer points of non-attachment while your muscles are literally screaming at you. You'll only understand what I'm saying when one drop of sweat drops from your nose onto the mat and you finally feel like you can breathe fully. And honestly, this is one of the sneakiest traps on the spiritual path. It's mistaking knowing the path for actually walking the path. Just because you can define a concept intellectually and kind of quote it or speak about it doesn't mean that you've actually understood it because you haven't embodied it yet. So I was so busy building this intellectual fortress that I didn't even see that the foundation itself was crumbling. My actual life was proof that it wasn't working. I was reactive and unhappy, just like I talked about. And being in that state of constant stress, I noticed that my posture began to become terrible, which is honestly a pretty good sign that, something is wrong and indicating the mental weight that I was carrying. But even though I was doing asanas at this point, even though I was on the journey to becoming a yoga teacher at this point, I would be buried in reading materials for my university degree, and I would notice that I hadn't really moved my body in any real way all day long. And the irony is that I was studying all these paths to liberation, but I was totally imprisoned in my own head with my books and not knowing a way of how to break out of that. And when I look back, this is a classic case of spiritual bypassing, using all these lofty ideas to avoid the messy aspects of just being human and the undeniable reality that I just didn't feel good in my body. So after a few weeks of feeling like this, I decided to just roll out my cheap PVC mat in my living room, and then I just started. And my pride wouldn't even let me go to a fancy studio with nice incense and a beautiful instructor. I just found a beginner's Ashtanga video on Yoga International, and I just pressed play, but it was brutal. Every single pose was almost like this direct confrontation with my own limits. And because I was on this cheap PVC mat, it would keep slipping and sweat was pouring from my eyes. And I was like, what is happening? My muscles are shaking. I've been doing yoga. I've been active, but I still feel like this is difficult. This is really hard. And all my carefully curated spiritual concepts of non-attachment and presence and equanimity and all these things, they were completely utterly useless in the face of what I was doing on the mat. But right there, I think for me, that's where the real work actually started. Because on the mat, you can't intellectualize. Your body doesn't care if you read the Bhagavad Gita or you read the Quran. It literally doesn't matter. It just cares about your breath, your alignment. And because it's such an intense physical experience, you're almost forced to be in the present moment somehow. And for 60 agonizing minutes that class was going on for, I was forced to almost get out of my head and come back into my body. And I finally, when I finished, I remember I was like finished in Shavasana and I was like collapsed on my back, and something shifted. The anxiety that I'd been like really, really trying to get rid of by understanding it, by labeling it, that tight knot in my chest that I would feel for weeks, I wasn't thinking about being calm. I wasn't like strategizing how I would avoid situations where I could be calm. I was just calm. And my body had done it in a way that my mind never could. And I'd burned through all of that, all those layers of intellectual noise. And it just came into the present moment, into my body. And I don't know how else to explain this to you, but spiritual masters have always warned us about this trap of thinking that knowing a spiritual concept is actually like experiencing it. And because we conflate the two, it's a source of a lot of our problems as well. So let's say you read about Sattva, Rajas, Tamas as the three gunas. Instead of like actually investigating it in different contexts in your life, we just file it away, and anytime there's another talk or another like repetition of that, we just say, yeah, I know it, I don't need to revisit it. But this is the problem, because you actually need to be repeatedly exposed to it over a long period of time and test it out in your real life in order for it to become like embodied. And so the antidote to kind of like intellectual thinking is just a simple, consistent asana practice. And so start out with the same kind of stubborn consistency that you have about reading. I know that I used to read whenever I had a chance, because I was obviously cramming for exams. I would read on the bus, I would read when I was waiting in line, all because I knew that every moment counted. So if you're one of those people that's been like addicted to accumulating information, have that same sense of like stubborn consistency that you have about reading or scrolling or all of these other things to consuming information, to just getting out of your head and coming back into your body. Because we like to use like high-minded ideas to avoid our messy reality of being human. And so when we're going through something like a breakup, for example, we then end up like quoting non-attachment from some guru instead of just like feeling the real pain of the breakup. And so instead of trying to understand it and label it and dissect it, we just need to drop that layer of conceptual identity and just feel it, just truly feel it. And instead of analyzing the anger, just kind of process it and release it through the practice. And this is specifically important if you don't have a somatic way to do this, because it's almost like a way of mental cleaning. And the heat, the deep breathing, the sensory feeling of the practice, it's almost like a furnace in a way. And in that fire, in that heat of the practice, the mind's impurities, the constant analysis, the conceptualizing, the spiritual ego, all of that stuff simply can't exist. It just melts away. And so whenever those subconscious emotions like anger, impatience, or frustration come up, they have nowhere to hide. They just have to come up and they bubble up to the surface. But because you've built that steady container of your practice, instead of running away from the pose, you can then choose to confront that discomfort and really truly stay. And this is where the real transformation happens, not in the library, but in the laboratory of your own mat. So you aren't just thinking your way out of an emotion, you're actually feeling your way through it, you're actually sensing through it and letting it be seen and released in a clear, safe way without like getting caught up in that story. And this is why intense exercise or cold baths or all these, somatic experiences are considered to be profoundly spiritual, because this journey from the head to the heart is really a process of unlearning. And it's about having the courage to step away from the cozy illusion of our intellectual control that we have over ourselves and just step into the messy, unpredictable, but frankly freeing reality of how things are. And all the philosophies at the end of the day, they're just kind of maps that are pointing you towards the destination, but you have to walk to your destination. So the sweat, the struggle, the daily grind of showing up every single day on the mat, that is the practice. And it's the practice of quietening the mind's endless chatter and finally having a chance to listen to what the body has to say and the wisdom that's been inside of you all along. So if you've ever felt like you've just been stuck in your head, collecting theories but not really seeing any real change in your life, I get it. I see you. Maybe consider setting up a call with me so we can chat about it a little bit more and we can see how to move beyond that theory and get into the meat of the practice. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because that then tells the algorithm to send you more of my videos next time I make it. But as always, thank you so much for watching till the very end. I hope you enjoyed this video and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.